Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
One stop. He's making cut with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It's another edition of Mode Push, your F1 podcast of choice. And for that, we thank you. If you're like me, maybe you listen to a lot more. But guess what? Dan Jimenez, my co-host, as always. Alex Kirry here. Dan, it was an amazing race, right? Can we walk away from
something? It was something.
It was a thing. It was definitely a race. They had a race. They have a podium.
Yeah, the outcome that we probably all expected still happened, but the journey from the start to the end was totally out of left field.
After a mess of red flags and red tape, it seemed like, and all of just the back and forth, Max Verstappen deservingly won the Grand Prix.
Oh, yeah.
For sure,
he's a bullet. Yeah.
For sure, and then you start to hear, too, later, again, Lewis was 10 seconds behind. And Lewis's performance, amazing.
Yeah.
And he was excited. He's on the radio sounding like 2 years ago, Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
Which was a great thing for the sport. I think it's awesome to have him performing. I think it's great that the Mercs showed up to the degree that they did. George could have very well been exactly in that spot. They could have easily gone 2-3. And I think that they may even have had the pace on Aston Martin on Sunday. However, and this is the part that I don't like about how this thing ended. And think of that podium, too. Max,
all the Lewis, championships,
Alonso. Like, what a fun thing to have all those guys on there. But I listened to way too much commentary on Sunday and Monday, I guess, earlier in this week, of people that were like, what an exciting Australian Grand Prix. And I totally disagree with it. I thought that I was extremely frustrated at the end.
Yeah.
As a person who wants to see a race end and under green flag conditions, somebody who wants to see this thing not be massively confusing, because that's the other part.
Yeah.
It's the part about trying to explain it to somebody else, because I had no idea how to even explain it. I knew why they were explaining the things that they had done. The problem was I have friends who started watching Drive to Survive last year or maybe even this year, and then they go, I didn't get any of it, and I turned it off. I didn't get it. When they started going through on the second red flag, and then they just basically went, let's pretend like that didn't happen, that restart didn't happen. What a freaking mess of a restart. I also was disappointed in these professional race drivers who couldn't keep their crap together for more than a quarter of a lap.
Yeah.
And so I was frustrated by the finish, and I know that F1 wants to pitch it like, wow, wasn't that exciting? The answer is it was massively confusing, and at the end, controversial, which doesn't necessarily mean a great race.
Yeah, and kind of a letdown. It's like, I think the longtime fans will be like, oh, yeah, I understand why that finished. But, you have to zoom out and look at the race from the perspective of, this new crop of fans and, where the growth is coming from. And just saying, that's actually a pretty terrible product if you're a sports fan, right? It's just really confusing and frustrating. And, everybody wants to see a race end under a green flag. And I understand, the circumstances in which that isn't always possible, but there are other race series who have figured this out. And in NASCAR, you have the green-white checker, which is basically guarantees that there's going to be a green flag finish unless there is a wreck on the very last lap, then it's over. But the problem in F1 is you can't do that because there's no refueling. There is a defined distance to the race, and it can't go any longer because these cars have exactly the amount of fuel and their engines are tuned to the exact rate, the fuel burn rate that is necessary to get to that distance. And so, it's done to reduce the cost, to make it safer on pit road. I get all of that, but I think F1 has to come up with some way to make it more simple and more reliable to have a green flag finish at the end of a race, or at least a logical reasoning as to, okay, why are we not? Because it just seems like it's all subjective to the stewards on how they want to, I can't remember the last time we had that last lap parade where it's okay, the safety car is going to peel off, but nobody passed. We're just going to drive across the line. Oh, and Carlos, you have a 5-second time penalty, but you can't, you got to maintain that distance. it was just such a confusing finish to the race.
It was, and I think that in the end, I can't tell if it's great for the sport or not. Like, again, people who I think are within the sport and watch it a lot, they go, that was just having something different happen doesn't mean it's great either.
Right.
And you think about Michael Massey, the native Australian, being there for the first time at an F1 race. It's almost like some weird curse that he brought. And there's also the part two where everybody, look, people do not like how that 2021 season ended, but you can't say that he wasn't trying to get some sort of a finish, because if you have the season end in that way that we watched on Sunday, that is not the way to finish a championship. And it's just, I get it. And here's the other thing too, Dan, that I hate, is that the rules are in a book and they're going to have to interpret it. Mm-hmm. And it could be any version of anything. That they could have done something totally different, and I would have gone, okay, I guess, whatever.
Yeah.
They could have done the reclassification before they did it before the restart. They could have done it after the restart. They could have done it, I think, a bunch of different ways, and you still would have been none the wiser, because I don't have the FIA rulebook in front of me, and I would never flip it open to try to understand it myself anyway, because it's going to get interpreted differently.
Yeah, there's so many edge cases that you just don't know as a regular fan that, okay, we're going to have a red flag restart, but if they don't get to the first sector line, then we have to fall back to the start position, because that's the last time we knew exactly what the running order was.
Sure.
And in F1, you know exactly what the running order is technically only at like at 3 points, right? At the start of each sector. They know exactly like everybody's time. And in NASCAR, there's like 15 time markers around each lap, and so they roll it back from like, okay, point of caution, roll it back to the last marker, and that's usually within like a second or two of when the caution flag came out.
How does NASCAR handle it, and is it any better? Like, do they try to
I
make
think
sure
they handle it better? Yeah.
So do they make sure that races end under a green flag, like always? Is that how they do it?
Always, unless that wreck happens on the last lap. But if it happens on lap 2, 3, 4, 5, however long it's going to take to clean up the mess, they do that. And they just parade around until it's ready to go again. Unless it's like a really bad wreck, then they red flag it. But yeah, they always guarantee a green flag finish unless there's a wreck on the exact last lap. And so, but they can do that because they can refuel the cars, So you could have 10 green, white checkers, and it's like, okay, well, you got to come in at some point and get some more fuel, or else we're going to run out. And in F1, we don't have that luxury anymore of being able to refuel the cars. And so, like the second to last red flag that came out with was it Kevin Magnussen's tire issue?
Yeah,
like they threw the red flag. I think that was for competition reasons. It was like, hey, we want to have a green flag finish. There's 3 laps left. Let's red flag it. Like, they probably could have backed people up behind the safety car and then sent a marshal out there and grabbed the tire off the track. But I think they did the red flag more for competition. Okay, great, that's fine. Now the second one was they red flagged it because it was a big giant mess, and
that was with the gravel on the track, right?
That was with because it was Ocon and Gasly got together, right?
The two.
That was the third red flag. Yeah. So the two Alpines were
that was on the restart. That was on the last restart.
On the last restart. Yeah. So they red flagged it because it was probably dangerous to bring the cars back through one more time.
Yeah.
If they had been more out of the way, I think they just would have
virtual
safety car and just finished the race. So I think it was just kind of a bit of some unfortunate events. But I think the other issue that F1 needs to figure out is, I mean, when they restart from a standing start after a red flag, these tires are pretty cold. Like there wasn't enough time to do 2 or 3 laps to try and really get the tires warmed up for the drivers. And so these guys all started on cold tires. And
so it's another safety issue.
Yeah. Carlos ends up hitting Alonso. Logan Sargent just like plows into the back of Nick DeVries from out at, like, that was like, hurry up, wait for me, guys. Like, let me be part of this wreck. Like he literally started last on the grid and had all the time and warning to be able to avoid it. And he still ran into somebody.
Yeah. I don't, as I'm looking at a lot of this too, I just am so, like, I want to be excited about the standings, right? I want to be excited about, but that to me wasn't that fun to watch, kind of the end of it, and I kind of threw my hands up and went, whatever, and then to go, oh, this is how it's going to end right here. Like, I guess it's the equivalent in, like, in football, taking a knee, or just like but you got to do it like for all 3 downs. You know, when you have like a minute 19, a minute 27.
You really drag it out, yeah.
And you just like, he has to keep, and there's one guy sitting there trying to get through and like, I'm going to make him fumble, you know, and then everybody else just kind of doing the fake, like hands up thing. But at least then they had earned it up to that point. And I think that that's the idea, right? I mean, in the end, Max won and he should have won.
Yeah.
What you don't want is to have that kind of stuff happen and they go, oh, whoops. You can't do anything else just by the luck of the draw. If he's not ahead of everybody on every single, you know, at the very beginning of the race it was interesting too because he absolutely got beat by George Russell off the line.
Yeah, this is a trend I think with Red Bull. Like he's
not good at starts.
He does not get great starts, and I don't know if it's him or if it's the car or what. But I think they're just so freaking fast that they know, like, hey, if we lose a couple spots on the start, that's fine. But we're going to blow by them when the DRS
3 laps happen,
opens up.
It's over.
So
okay. So of all the things that are going on, because that was the race, and when it comes down to the actual F1 standings, as I open it up here, I was looking at some of these that are surprises. I think the biggest one, of course, is Aston Martin in that second spot. By the way, any guesses on how many points they earned last year in the championship overall?
Aston Martin?
Yeah. So they're 65
gosh.
right now.
They would have all probably come from Vettel. So maybe about this much?
55. They're already 10 points clear of their 3 races in. 3 races, 3 podiums.
Good for them. That's great.
And you know what? I just see, I mean, Fernando Alonso just must be loving it. And so this whole mission 33 for him to win his 33rd race, it's really funny to me because like teams will do that kind of garbage all the time where they're like, we have these goals. And it's like, yeah, but are you going to get there? And the reality is Aston Martin and Mercedes is now right there, I think, with them. I think what we saw in this race was you saw Mercedes come to the track. I think that their qualifying ended up being better pace than we anticipated. Maybe that they did even too, because I think that after FP1 and FP2, everybody's going, all right, so 6th, 7th, you know, maybe on this thing. I think what we figured out in terms of storylines is that Ferrari really is actually a lot further away than we thought too.
Yeah, I would say 2 races ago, we were all saying Mercedes is 4th at best. And I think very clearly 2nd right now. I mean, it's definitely not Ferrari with the luck that they're having. And I do think that that car has more pace than the Aston Martin in Australia. So I think that the fortunes are going to turn around very quickly for Mercedes, especially as they bring new upgrades. And like one of the things that popped out to me from the last week or so was analysis on the driver's seat position on the Mercedes. And it kind of ties to what Lewis had been talking about, like, you know, they're not really taking my input. You know, he's been complaining that he feels weird in the car, that he feels like he's on top of the front tires. And they compared the Mercedes to their car last year and versus everybody else this year, and their seat is pushed way forward. And you would do that for weight balance issues. Like, you know, there's not a lot of weight on the front tires of these cars because the engine's in the back. And you want a lot of weight on the front tires so that you can get more front grip. And for some reason this year they pushed his driver's seat forward a bunch, and it sounds like part of the upgrades are going to be moving him back so he's sitting more on the back wheels. And
is that a preference for him too? I mean, if he's complaining about sitting too far forward,
I think it's a preference, feel, being comfortable in the car, and then they'll just have to achieve the weight distribution that they want more with aero, right?
It just feels like that would be standard. Like you go, no, we put you where you feel the most comfortable. And obviously vision is a huge deal too. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't want to mess that up at all. Like I wouldn't want to mess with where Lewis Hamilton, you want to see these exact things when you're driving. Yeah. I'm not going to change it then, you know, like that. So that to me is pretty interesting, and it's a little backward engineering wise, and probably some of the reasons that some of the engineering has been backward anyway for him.
Yeah, and I think with all these changes, Mercedes is going to really turn things around and be the clear second, and then Alonso, just through his own pure, you know, talent, will keep Aston Martin in third. And then, Ferrari's luck doesn't turn around. They might get passed by McLaren. Like McLaren scored 12 points in one race.
Yeah, but the only reason they did was because those two French cars
they got so lucky
together. Because Alpine has better pace than McLaren.
Yeah,
I don't think they have better pace than Ferrari, but don't put it past Pierre Gasly, and even Ocon's not a slouch himself in the seat. This Alpine car is a little bit faster than I think we thought it was going to be. At least they've gotten better through the early parts of the season here. So From a team standpoint, yeah, right now it's 1, 2, 3 Red Bull, Aston Martin, Mercedes, and I do think you're seeing I think that both drivers are pretty excited because I think they see something turning, like you were talking about, that Aston Martin isn't going to be able to keep up with some of the development that they're going to have or some of the upgrades that they bring to these races.
Yeah, I think that it was inevitable that Max was going to get past one Mercedes at least, but most likely two. But it would have been interesting to see the entire race two Mercedes versus Max, and the Alex Albon red flag at the beginning of the race caught George out on his strategy because he had already pitted right when the safety car came out. So then it became a 1-versus-1 fight with Lewis, and then that ended pretty quickly.
Which is a bummer because George had obviously outperformed.
Yeah, he was super
Lewis,
quick,
and he keeps outperforming. I mean, I don't know did we ever get an explanation as to why that car lit on fire? I mean, it's just
no. I don't
see
think
that very
I hear
often.
it. Yeah,
you don't see it very often. You certainly don't see it with Mercedes very often.
Yeah, that thing caught on fire pretty quick. I have not seen any reports on what exactly that was. But yeah, I think they're quick. George is showing that he's every bit as quick as Lewis, so I think that'll make things interesting to see how those two perform. Right now, I think more just because of DNFs, Lewis is ahead of George by 20 points. But even like the gap between Max and Sergio, like it feels like, oh my gosh, Max is running away with this, but Max is only 15 points ahead of Sergio, which is like if Sergio gets a win or a second place and Max has a DNF,
if
then
Sergio would have even had a decent day of qualifying,
yeah,
I didn't know what was going on with his car. I don't even think he knew what was going on. Like,
yeah,
he probably would have finished more along that second.
Yeah, and I think he took a power unit change too, which I think is why he finished. He started from the pit lane.
Yeah.
So, but I think 15 points is not that big of a lead, and Max knows it. I think Max talked about how in the post race that in those first few red flag restarts he had to be pretty conservative because he's got more to lose than everybody else. Everyone can just like go for broke to try and get a win, but if he DNFs, then he could pretty quickly lose the lead of the championship. I think that's the only thing that keeps him from winning the championship this year are unforced errors and DNFs, and so he'll drive more conservatively in those situations. So I think Sergio can push the issue.
Who sucked this last weekend?
Oh man,
as drivers and as constructors, who were amazing. I'll start with the amazing part because I think we know that Red Bull is what they are. I think it's really fun to see Aston Martin still fighting for. Being on the podium for all three of the first races is crazy to think. Mm-hmm. But I have to tip my cap to freaking Nico Hülkenberg, man.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
He's out-raced in every race his Kevin Magnussen, his teammate. So the first thing you got to do is beat your teammate. And he's out-qualified him and everything, too. And he gets seventh place, and he gets points. And by the way, Haas is now in seventh in the constructors because they and you know what? So you can make an argument they should probably have more points too. So Nico has actually been way better than I thought he was going to be. Out of those two drivers, you go, well, Kevin got his feet under him last year, and he performed really, really well last year. He still hasn't seemed to figure out the car, and I know he had the bad, but he was pretty far back still when he had his incident.
Yeah.
But Nico Hülkenberg comes back into the sport, and he's just been phenomenal. I think Haas. If you're a fan of the American team, I think they're really fun to watch right now, and they kind of don't have anything to lose. And I think it's just going to continue. I think
Gunter's looking like probably feeling justified in his decision to drop Mick and bring on Nico. That's for sure. I think Nico's got great experience, and yeah, that's who came to mind to me, who had a really good weekend. I wish Alex Albon hadn't DNF'd. I think he was running sixth at the time.
Yeah.
And Williams needs every point that they can get,
and they would have gotten a good chunk there.
So that was pretty unfortunate for them.
How's Logan Sargent doing? Do you think? I know this weekend was not very good for him.
I think this last weekend was not great. I think I was pretty optimistic after the first race in Bahrain, and then the last few races he's just looked more like a rookie. But I think I'd put him on par. I think he's probably the slowest of the three rookies. But I think we already thought that coming into the race or into the season. So I'm going to withhold judgment for a couple more races. But if the trends continue, then I think he's the most inexperienced driver in the slowest car on the grid. So he's probably going to run somewhere in the high teens most of the season.
Hey, Yuki got a point. The guy's been getting 11th every time. He wouldn't have been 11th if the two Alpines wouldn't have. There are a lot of people who should thank the French team for
they really
for how they ended up in
out.
the points. In terms of teams, when you put those, I guess it wasn't really their fault, but I mean, those two cars coming together and looking like just mirrors of one another, parked, up against that
so
wall.
Unfortunate.
And $1.5 million worth of damage on those two cars combined, and just on top of the fact that those points went away, that was a bummer of a weekend for the French team.
And then on top of that, they didn't give Pierre Gasly a penalty, and he is already right on the verge of having enough points, what they call them on his driver's license, on his super license, that he'd be suspended for a race. And so they said if the stewards had given him the kind of standard penalty for causing a wreck, then he'd be out the next race. But since he ran into his own teammate, they were more lenient, I guess. But that seems like a bit of a double standard. So I think Pierre's got to be really careful, or he's going to be kicked out of a race here soon. Ferrari.
And specifically, Charles Leclerc. Now, I know it's not his problem, but to go into, I think of all the sports, of all the things that can happen in a sport, to fly everybody across the world, to get everything set up, and then to be done into the first turn of the 58-lap race. That must just be so, and I know they have to just deal with it because that's the nature of the sport, but man, Charles has 6 points?
Yeah.
And he had 71 at this point last year.
Oh, my God.
He had 71 points. That's more than what Max has right now through 3 races. He had 71 points going into this 4th race of the season last year. And this year, he's looking like he did at Sauber when he was a rookie.
Yeah, I've heard this joke going around on Twitter, but it was last year there was that famous photo of Binotto, kind of pointing his finger right at Charles, and his face of the meme was Charles, this is the worst season of my life, and Binotto's it's the worst season of your life so far.
So far, yeah.
And it's that's what we're at right now. It's this is worse than last season.
Somehow
so
it is.
I think that Charles he's trying so hard, right? And I think that I don't think what his move on the outside of Lance Stroll that caused him to get spun out. I don't think that was a overly aggressive move, but I also think he could be a bit more conservative on the start. Just let the race come to him, get some laps in. To your point, don't DNF in the first sector.
I think that he gets this in his head. I'm going to, because what did he start on the grid? 5th,
somewhere
5th or 6th. I think he was on the 4th row. You don't need to be in 3rd by the time you get to the 4th turn, right?
Right.
You won't be. So just relax, get on your strategy. And just go. And the thing is that, with that finish and with a lot of the other ones, not just on points and everything, but Carlos is outperforming Charles so far this year. It just doesn't
consistency,
seem it just doesn't seem like, and poor Carlos, why was he so upset about that? Because I think I've seen 5-second penalties being handed out, and I don't know. In my mind, it did look like he maybe. I don't know. I don't know why everybody was so upset about the 5-second penalty. People were saying it looked like, this should not have been a penalty, and I'm going. And he was obviously, if you listen to the radio call, he was like, no. Like they told him his mom died.
Emotional,
No. He's like, oh no, please tell them, please. And you're like, dude, they're not going. Okay, you convinced us.
Yeah.
I mean, they do listen. They will listen, but tell them they need to talk to me first. When he was saying that, I was going, dude, you sound
there's nothing you can do about
petulant
this,
here, dude. But I don't know what the argument was to not get the 5-second penalty, because he definitely put somebody off the track. Now,
yeah, that's the standard penalty. I think that the 5-second penalty to me is always kind of weird. I'd rather like in NASCAR, this would have been, and I always referring back to this, but it would have been a point penalty. They don't ever change the outcome of the race unless it's it was found that you were cheating, right? If you were cheating, then your result gets stripped. But for something like this, they would do a penalty for drivers and constructor points in F1. So versus changing the outcome of the race, 5 seconds is just such an arbitrary number. And especially when you combine that with this weird red flag ending where everyone paraded across very close to, super close to each other, then that means dropping from 4th to 12th or whatever it was. It basically guaranteed that he was finishing last on the lead lap. Yeah. That felt like an outsized and aggressive penalty, given the situation, where I wish it would have been like you get a 3 grid place penalty or you get a 5 or 10 point deduction on your driver championship or something like that, versus the time penalty feels so arbitrary to give out for something that's like so late in the race. They don't because if you get a 5-second time penalty on lap 1, then you have the whole race to make that up, make your strategy decisions.
Even if he got it in 30, he probably would have been ahead of some. When you do it right then, he goes from, what was he in, 5th?
Yeah, to
fifth
down to 12th.
No, he was 4th. 4th down to just you're out of the points totally.
Yeah,
right?
that's where it felt like it was not. I agree that he should have been penalized, but I think that was too much.
You always call it spicy news. What are some of the spicy news bits that are going on outside of the track? And, boy, we have a lot of weeks. I think the 30th is our next race,
thanks
right?
to the Chinese Grand Prix being canceled. We've got a bit of a ways to go.
So we got till April 30th. It's like, this is the break that you usually get midsummer. But but here we are, less than we have a few weeks to hang out and kind of talk about this thing. But what Felipe Massa, I don't know the history as much. This is when he was racing with Ferrari, though, right? I mean,
yes.
In 2008. Why is he's considering suing F1 or the FIA or I don't know who?
Both, maybe.
For what?
I think F1 specifically.
To get a championship, to have it like it's hard
restated,
to go. Okay, what happened?
So roll back the tapes, 2008, in the final race of the season, you might remember this is a famous highlight where Ferrari crosses the line and they're convinced that they just won the championship, so they all start celebrating.
Right. Yep.
And then Lewis gets around somebody.
For like 4th.
Yeah, for like 4th. He gains 1 point and he crosses and he wins the championship. And you have two teams celebrating at the same, McLaren and Ferrari celebrating at the same time, thinking they both won the championship, until Ferrari realizes that Lewis picked up that point.
It. There's some guy in the garage who starts pushing people around, going, "Stop celebrating!"
Celebrating.
He's like pushing like moms and stuff who are in there. They're all crying, and he's like, "Stop! We didn't get it. Look!"
Yeah.
And then people are like, "What?"
So that's the famous finish to that season. So. If Lewis hadn't gotten that position, it would have been a tie, and then the tiebreaker would have gone to Felipe Massa for having won more races that season than Lewis. So, earlier in the season at Singapore, it was the first night race that F1 had ever done. And I think it was the first race at the Singapore Grand Prix. They that race was won by Fernando Alonso in the Renault, which hadn't won a race yet that season, and they're kind of crappy. Like. Alonso wins his 2 championships with Renault, goes to McLaren, doesn't like being second fiddle to the new Lewis Hamilton, goes back to Renault, and they stink. Well, they needed to get a win, and so that race, they have a really weird pit strategy going on where they pit really early, get on hard tires, they're out of cycle with everybody else, and then Fernando Alonso's teammate, Nelson Piquet Jr., crashes.
He crashes on purpose.
He crashes in a very convenient moment at a very convenient point in the track that forces a safety car. And not only does it force a safety car, but it forces like everyone to back up real close to the safety car. So when they all pit, Fernando just passes everybody, and he goes on to win the race. Because he just can maintain it, and he's on the right strategy. So at the time, there wasn't a lot of like public outcry of like, oh my gosh, that was like a race that was fixed, because that wasn't really anything that had ever happened in F1. It was kind of inconceivable. So, why are we talking about this right now is in recent weeks, Bernie Ecclestone, who was the CEO of Formula One at the time.
For a long time, yeah.
And for a very long time.
Until a couple of years ago. Yeah.
He was like the David Stern kind of like, don't mess with this
Only
guy.
Even shorter.
Even shorter. With much younger wives. And so, girlfriends or whatever he had.
Sure.
He always had like a 40-year gap
He is the Leonardo DiCaprio of bosses in F1. I've always said this.
Gosh. So recently, Ecclestone just keeps running his mouth on stuff, and he told a publication that he and F1 knew that Nelson Piquet Jr. had like come forward and said like, "Hey, the team bosses told me to wreck on lap 21 and turn 17," and so F1 did. They claimed before that they didn't know that until after the season was over.
Was it do they have radio back and forth where it was like, go to plan C, which is C stands for crash? Like, what are they?
No, so Nelson Piquet, after the season was over, came forward and said, hey, this was all rigged. But at that point, the season was over. There's something in the rulebook that said you couldn't restate the season results. And so there was like a lawsuit back and forth between Nelson Piquet and Renault, and it kind of all just kind of got finally settled by F1. They banned the team boss and the technical director from Renault for like lifetime bans. So you guys can't come back. I think they stripped something or they fined them. And so that was like the resolution. But I guess what's coming forward now is that Bernie Ecclestone is saying like, oh, like Nelson Piquet didn't tell us after the season. He told us like right after the race. Like so we knew and had time to have changed in what we should. And Ecclestone even says this, like we should have changed the result of that race.
Or you should have at least gotten the team bosses together and then like had an appeal like right then. When they do appeals, you don't do it in 2023 when it happened in 2008. You do it that week or that day, and they'll send out they'll try to figure it out that day, especially if they knew there was some sort of because if that happens right now, I mean, heaven knows. Well, first of all, asking somebody to crash is a problem. Like, you think about how much this sport needs safety. Number one, which is that's the other thing I was going to say about the red flags is. Red flags are there to keep the racers safe.
Right.
These race car drivers safe.
And the marshals.
And the marshals. Everybody who's involved in this thing is to keep them safe. Somebody got hit by Magnussen's debris, by the way, up in the crowd. Somebody did get hit, but it wasn't like a major deal. It got cut or something like that. But still, this is something that all the racetracks have to deal with. So imagine asking somebody to crash on purpose and then those types of results. I know these guys are pros and they could put a car into the wall, but we've seen, and again, you think about the impact that Dale Earnhardt Sr. had. No one looks at that footage and goes, "That guy probably died." Like
no, it's innocuous.
It looks like a lot of and so I think it's an awful look. Would that ever happen? Would F1 ever look at that and go, "Let's give a co-championship or something like that year?" Or because you're talking about Lewis Hamilton, that was his first championship.
All options are on the table at this point. I think that Felipe Massa has a legitimate case that something fishy happened, and that the right
and they
thing
knew about it,
and they knew about it, and that if you made all these corrections, what's the end result? Felipe Massa wins the 2008 championship. Lewis goes from 7-time to 6-time when everyone is thinking he should have been at 8-time. So that's what's relevant right now. And I mean, to your point, it was a huge deal at the time. Like, I would put it on par with like the whole NBA refs gambling on game stuff.
Yeah.
It was that level of like of a deal.
Collusion between multiple folks, not just one person trying to cheat.
Yeah, throws into question the entire integrity of the sport.
Oh,
and so it was a big deal then. But like F1, the footing that they had at the time was like, oh, we didn't find out until after the award ceremony, and so there's nothing we can do about it. But Ecclestone's saying like, no, we knew a lot sooner.
Boy, Bernie, you could have just ridden off into the sunset with one of your hot girlfriends.
Go to the grave with that, with that knowledge.
And the grave is around the corner, by the way.
Not far away.
Okay. So, of all the things going on, I know we've got a couple weeks to be able to kind of chat about some of these things and to jump in on this, but we've got so many things we still want to talk about and get people ready for, I guess the next race is...
Azerbaijan.
Of course. I don't know anything about
Baku. I like Baku.
Baku's been good to some of the George. That's a racetrack that George Russell does well at. I know he has a history of being sad about it, but he's also he probably wants to get that sure victory in the bag. After the puncture he had that one year. Baku's also a place that Sergio Perez does well.
Yeah, street course. Sergio does well there. Then last year Charles won, I believe. Baku last year. I think Max had some kind of an issue. And then the year before was the famous Lewis Hamilton with the brake issue on the red flag restart when he blew through turn one.
That's right.
And so, I think that it's like Saudi Arabia, it is a very fast street course that I think has good racing for being a street course. I'm looking forward to it. I think that the potential for chaos is high there.
I'm showing Dan right now the debris. That is a shredded rim right there that flew into the crowd.
Oh, Interesting.
That is because if you saw it when he was coming back in, half of that rim was shorn off. It flew into the crowd. That is a big chunk
that's not
of
good.
extremely sharp metal. Now, that being said, that is a really cool. Look, his arm's bleeding right there.
Yeah, what a souvenir to take home.
I would say that thing is getting framed. I'm putting it over my bed, man. Like that's.
I mean, that's like there was the whole story at the end of the race was that somehow whoever was organizing running this race let the fans onto the track too soon at the end of the Grand Prix.
I saw, and what did they end up doing? I mean, because the race organizers get in trouble for that kind of stuff.
They must get. I don't know. They'll get some sort of slap on the wrist, but it was super unsafe.
Weird.
I mean, I've always thought it was a bit weird to even let fans on the track at all, but cool, great. Like when I went to Singapore, it's awesome. I'm going to go walk around, but yeah, there's potential for that issue where one marshal gets a little trigger happy and then doesn't know exactly like, oh wait, the race is still going on.
Lap, yeah, that
could be dangerous.
That's a bad deal. Okay, well, there's tons of things still to get through over the next few weeks here, and so we're going to jump into those. Over these next couple of weeks, we're going to still be pumping out some of these episodes and keeping you up to date with the F1 stuff. So, Dan, good episode, man.
Yeah,
I think we had it all in there. We got Bernie Ecclestone's girlfriend's in there. That might be a good name for a fantasy F1 team. Come on,
perfect, man.
Yeah. So for Dan, I'm Alex. We'll catch you next week, everybody. We're going to be rolling out another episode. Dan is going to bring you some of his signature engineering knowledge so that you can get smarter. In F1. So for Dan, I'm Alex. We'll see you next time, everybody.